Today marks the beginning of the London series. I'll break down what to watch for on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. The London series begins today. I don't know about you. I am thrilled to get to sit back and watch a spectacle game, a spectacle series, a new audience, see the Mets play in a new ballpark, and see two teams that don't like each other get to square off on a national stage. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch this series. And I think it came at the perfect time for the New York Mets because vibes are at an all-time high for this season, coming off that series in Washington. To get a sweep and to get it in that way with such a convincing victory on Wednesday, it just makes vibes perfect for this type of a journey. Because after beating up on the Nationals, thank you, Patrick Corbin, for that, the Mets went on an 8-hour flight to with friends and family, all coming aboard together to head over to experience what's essentially a vacation where they get to play some baseball games. And there's team functions, team dinners, so many different things where these guys can just be happy and enjoy themselves for a couple days before they get back to the grind of an MLB season. And they got to go up against a great Phillies team. But I really believe that this London series can be a springboard for the New York Mets. It can take what happened in DC, which was, let's be honest, beating up on a team that's not very good. Granted, a team that has not been one of the worst in baseball this year. They've been bad, but their record right in line with the Mets up to this point. But if you watch those games like I did in person, you saw a club that's not in the same league as the Mets as far as talent on paper. And the Mets did what they're supposed to do there. Now you're going up against a team that's much better, but if you can hold your own against the Phillies, if you can win one of these games or even both of these games, which would be miraculous, but if you can just hang in there and not embarrass yourself, not cough up some late leads, whatever it is, right? If you can just stay in the mix and carry that back home with you, hopefully the Mets can continue to play good baseball throughout the rest of this month, and that'll lead them to what I think is a stretch of the season where they really can get into the wild card race before the deadline. And when you look back at last season, if you think about how bad the Mets were, what you might sort of forget is there was actually a lot of months where they were a 500 team or better. There was 2 awful months for the Mets last year. It was June, where they were 7-19 and basically lost their season. And then it was in August, after the fire sale, where they were running out a lot of bad players. The vibes were at an all-time low after trading so many great talents. You go 11-18 in August. If you take those 2 months out of the Mets season, 2023, they were a 57-50 ball club. They went 18-37 in those 2 bad months. If you look at a 57-50 win team, that's essentially an 86 win team over a full season. That would have been a playoff team. Now, you can't just remove bad months. But the reason why I say that is the Mets had their bad month in May. 9-19 record. It was brutal. Can they avoid that moving forward? And can they have another great month? Whether that's June or July. But if they can hold themselves above 500 for this month, or maybe a little bit better, and then they have a fantastic July, they can be in this race by the deadline, and we could have a season on our hands, which I put a poll out there earlier this week. What would you prefer for the Mets to basically end up in another fire sale situation or be in the playoff hunt? And it was 55-45, 55% of the audience on YouTube saying they wanted to see the fire sale, 45% still wanting a season. And I personally believe if I put that same poll up at the end of June and the Mets are 5 games under 500, they've gotten a little bit closer and they're hanging in the race and they're playing some better baseball, the results might skew closer to 50-50. And then if July goes great, all of a sudden I think the fan base would buy back in. And the reason why I sort of point out that layout of the schedule and how things can sort of break for the Mets is because they are sitting in a really interesting spot when you sort of look at the road ahead. You got these two against Philly, okay? You have a roster that was just shifted before this stretch, right? Before you played the Diamondbacks and then eventually the Nationals. You added Iglesias, you added Torrens, you added Nunez and Danny Young to the bullpen to give you some fresh arms. There was a shakeup. The vibes changed a little bit. Now you carry that, okay, and you have a great series in DC. Now you bring it to London. Let's say you hold your own here. You come back home, you got the Marlins. If you can do what you did to the Nationals, to the Marlins, and beat up on a bad team, you have the Padres, Rangers, Cubs, Yankees, and Astros to close this month. The Yankees are the only great team in that bunch. The Padres have been playing really good ball, but you can do your best to really, again, stay above water as far as the rest of this month and put yourself in a position to take advantage of what the schedule has gifted you at the beginning of July. Because we just mentioned a lot that Nationals team. Well, the Mets will get to enjoy 7 matchups against the Nationals at the beginning of July. They'll also have 4 against Pittsburgh and 3 against the Rockies. That right there is a 14-game stretch where the Mets could really stack some victories. Then you have the All-Star break and you come out of it with another series against the Marlins. So that's your window right there. It's an 18-game stretch. It's a 4-game set against the Marlins out of the break. An 18-game stretch where you could really put yourself into the race ahead of the deadline, where you remove yourself from the seller category and maybe even a selective buyer. But this is a series in London where all eyes are on the New York Mets, where it's either going to be the culmination of their season. This is going to be the last time the New York Mets are relevant all year because they're going to embarrass themselves against the Phillies, come home, and it's just going to be same old Mets from a week ago. Or they're going to show themselves well in this measuring stick series, come back, play some good ball, and then maybe with the schedule laying up for them in July, they could play some great baseball. And again, we might have a season. I'm not trying to get ahead of myself too much, but it is really exciting to at least be sitting in a position where there is a little hope going into this series, which on the other side for the Phillies is just a little vacation. It's a footnote in a season where they have a lot bigger plans ahead. This means a lot more to the Mets than it does to the Phillies, and I'm hoping that results in some better performance out of the Mets to maybe surprise some people and do some big things over the next couple of days. I want to preview the pitching matchups, who's going to start for these games in the lineup as well. Are we going to see Jeff McNeil? We'll talk about those things as well as where to watch these games. So we'll go through all that in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Are you struggling to close deals? B2B selling is tougher than ever, and that's why I want to tell you about LinkedIn Sales Navigator. LinkedIn Sales Navigator is a sales intelligence platform that helps professionals effectively prospect and engage high-value customers, drive higher revenue, and increase sales performance. Sales Navigator helps you target the right buyers, surface key signals such as job changes or which accounts you should prioritize, and shows you hidden allies so you can find those buyers that are most likely to convert. Fueled by LinkedIn's 1 billion member platform, Sales Navigator gives you the most up-to-date and first-party data, enabling you to unlock conversations with the people that matter. Right now, you can try LinkedIn Sales Navigator and get a 60-day free trial at linkedin.com/lockedon. That is linkedin.com/lockedon for a 60-day free trial. LinkedIn Sales Navigator will help you sell like a superstar today. Just go to linkedin.com/lockedon and get started. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime something breaks on the Mets. You can also ask me questions there anytime. You can get the lineup graphic sent to your phone for each game, so you don't have to go to social media to see us in the starting lineup. You also can take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so who's pitching in this series? Mets versus Phils. You got Sean Manaea versus Rangers Suarez in game 1, matchup of a couple of lefties. Suarez has been a Cy Young candidate this year, a guy that could start the All-Star game. He has a 1.70 ERA on the season. Now, he was hit in the hand during his last start on a line drive, 106 miles per hour, hit his thumb on his pitching hand. So he avoided the worst to not even have an IL stint. That took place on June 1st. We'll see, though, if he is completely healthy, good to go. It is something to monitor to see how he actually fares going through a full start. His last time against the Mets this year, he went 5 innings, allowed 2 runs, but both of them were unearned. Manaea, meanwhile, against Philly this year, had a great start, actually. Allowed 1 run on 4 hits, 1 walk, struck out 6 over 6 innings pitched. Game 2 is a matchup of a couple of struggling pitchers. Jose Quintana versus Taijuan Walker. For Quintana, ERA over 5 this year, although he did have a good start against Philly as well. Went 5 1/3, allowed just 2 runs. Meanwhile, Walker has a 5.73 ERA on the year, and the Mets knocked him out in the 4th inning of his start. He did score a pair of runs. This, again, was earlier this year. When you look at the London series and the history of it, it has been some high-scoring games. Sometimes when you have these showcase series, Major League Baseball likes to, send a little bit of fireworks to the ballpark in the form of some juice baseballs. That's speculation, but, we've seen it before. So I wouldn't be surprised if the baseballs were flying. And so you see Manaea and Quintana be put in that situation. And I don't feel great about the Mets' ability to limit runs in this series. You got to be able to hit them. And the fact that Suarez is going for the Phillies, it does give them a distinct edge. With that said, the Mets have their entire roster at their disposal, basically, when it comes to the pitchers who can help out for these 2 games. What I mean by that is you have a completely healthy bullpen, right? And you have Tyler McGill, who should be good to go in the first game on full rest, 4 days rest, if you need him. David Peterson should be good to go game 2 on full rest. So if the Mets needed to call on one of those guys to fill in and to piggyback a struggling starter, not to mention Adrian Hauser, they do have some depth of options that they can go with. That the only pitcher that's absolutely not going to be seen in this series is Luis Severino. And I'm trying to think if there's any other. That's probably it. So Severino is probably the only guy who won't pitch, and that could set him up to pitch first game back when the Mets will play the Marlins on Tuesday. I'm trying to think in my head here. Yeah, he pitched on Wednesday, so Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Yeah, he'd be good to go. So he's the one guy. Everybody else could be in the card. So that's just another thing to think about. Now, Brett Baty is the 27th man for this series. What does that mean? He's not technically back on the roster as far as being added and having to be optioned again after the series. He's here for 2 games. He can be used like any other player, which gives the Mets another lefty bat off the bench. He will not start game 1. You got a lefty and Ranger Suarez on the mound, so Mark Vientos will absolutely be in the starting lineup there. We could see Brett Baty in game 2 if the Mets wanted to throw him a start. I think it's awesome that Baty got to experience this trip with the Mets. He's still going to be a big part of the team this year. We'll actually talk about how he could find his way back in this roster sooner than later in the next segment because we got some interesting information there. So we'll touch on that as well as an injury update on Jett Williams, a bad one. So we'll go through that in the final segment today. But that is the situation with Baty. He's the 27th man. He's here for these 2 games, and then he'll be right back to Syracuse. With Suarez starting game 1, you have to wonder if the Mets are going to roll with the exact same lineup that they had in DC, where they squared off against 3 straight lefties. Are they going to have Jose Iglesias again starting at second base with Jeff McNeil coming off the bench? I think there is a distinct possibility that we see that. Will Luis Torrens get another start after his 2 home run game against a lefty? Could he be right back in there in the starting lineup? I think that is another possibility for the Mets here. So I imagine we might see that same group. The one other note about what the Mets might do here, Starling Marte was a late scratch on Wednesday with some knee pain. Is he ready to go? And I'm not entirely positive, but I believe it's turf that they're playing on for this series. And I think the Mets have been hesitant to play Marte on turf. So you could see Marte in a bench role for this series to give that knee plenty of time. And they could slide Jeff McNeil into right field for game 1 if they wanted to finally give him a start after having him on the bench for all this time. Or they can go right back to that Wednesday lineup that had Tyrone Taylor out there. Then game 2 with Taijuan Walker going, you could start DJ Stewart in right field, or you could start Jeff McNeil in right field and play Iglesias at second base again. They have those options that they can go to if they want to keep Marte away from the turf, assuming it is turf, but I'm pretty sure it is because they just built that ballpark overnight. So I imagine it's turf. If they want to protect him in that knee, you might see that where he just comes in and runs or gets a pinch hitting opportunity if the situation dictates it. But otherwise, if he's good to go, clean bill of health, maybe he plays the start of the game against Suarez and then maybe put Tyrone Taylor in there like 6 innings into the game to spare Marte's knees a little bit. Other than that, where do you watch these games? Game 1 will be 1:10 today on Saturday on Fox. That's 1:10 Eastern. Game 2 is going to be a morning game. So it's sort of like the London game in the NFL that you see early in the morning. You almost forget that you set your fantasy lineup. Same kind of situation here. The Mets will be playing at 10:10 Eastern time AM, and that'll be on ESPN. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch these two games. I haven't quite decided what my podcast schedule is going to be throughout this series. I believe I'll probably recap game 1 unless it's super forgettable. And I might do that on a live stream or, just a typical Sunday release. But with the day game, I think I'm probably more leaning towards doing a stream following this game on Saturday afternoon. So if you want to check that out, it'll be live on YouTube. So make sure you're subscribed if you're watching here now. And on the audio side, I'll get it posted, 30 minutes, something like that, after it streams live. But we still got a couple of news items to discuss. Brett Baty potentially playing some second base and Jett Williams needing surgery. I'll talk about both of those things in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining Supply House's free Trade Master program, where every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/T-M and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. The NBA Finals and Stanley Cup Finals in full swing here. You want to make sure that you're up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, so make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, Brett Baty was, of course, in front of the media today talking about his crazy travel. He went, what was it? They said I think they flew from, I can't remember where they started. If it was Syracuse to Atlanta to St. Paul, Minnesota. Then he found out that he was going to be part of this series. So then it was Minnesota back to New York to get his passport to then go to DC to be on the charter with the rest of the team over to the UK. So a crazy couple of days for Brett Baty. And he talked about the demotion, and I got to say, he handled everything exactly how you'd want him to, said all the right things. That is part of the business. He is just showing up to the ballpark wherever they tell him to and going about his process to be the best ball player he can be. They were asked about his improvements defensively, just talked about how much he focused on that in the offseason. And then when asked about a potential or what he would work on in Syracuse, he said that he was expected to get some time at second base. And so he'd already done some work just on the field before games, taking some ground balls over there. I remember he was doing a little bit of that prior to Jose Iglesias coming into the fold after they DFA'd Joey Wendell, where there was no backup second baseman on the roster and Jeff McNeil was playing every inning. So during that time, Baty saw a little bit of action just before games. Now it does seem like once he gets back to Syracuse, he's going to start some games at second base and just add another tool into his kit. He talked about back in high school, he used to play all around. And so he's kind of relishing the opportunity to do some of that again. And again, just saying all the right things. But this is important to the Mets because it would allow them some more roster flexibility. And it really does feel like David Stearns wants Brett Baty and Mark Vientos at this stage on the big league roster, and rightfully so. These are the guys that are going to be important for 2025. You have to learn what you have so you can best plot your course this offseason to attack the roster and address the holes as they really want to start contending for hopefully World Series, but just to be a viable playoff contender year over year beginning in 25. These are guys you got to learn a lot about and guys that need to develop against big league pitching. You see Brett Baty go down and hit 2 home runs in his first game back in Syracuse, sort of shows you that that level is not going to challenge him. He needs to make the adjustments to be challenged against big league pitching. So if you add second base into the toolkit for him as another option, well, now you can have some games where you start Brett Baty at second and Mark Vientos at third. And if Vientos is getting, let's just say, 5 starts a week at third base, and if this is a 7-game slate that you have on a given week, Brett Baty can maybe get a couple starts at third when they're benching Vientos. He can get a start at second and maybe one in left field potentially. But this is a way that you can sort of juggle playing time for these guys and allow them to get at bats against big league pitching. Of course, if the Mets are out by the deadline, they can really clear up playing time, trade one of or both of Pete Alonso and JD Martinez. You slide Vientos over to first base. Baty plays third every day. And that is probably the most likely outcome of what we're going to see to get these guys their playing time in August and September. But in the meantime, having Brett Baty add some second base versatility, it only helps the Mets this season. And really long-term, it even just gives Baty another look because having versatility in the big leagues these days is a really good thing. So I'm glad the Mets are going to do that. Something that I've talked about on this show a lot, getting Brett Baty some work at second now that he's back in Syracuse. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the results are once we finally see it in action. Now, the bad news of the day, hate to close here for the show, but Jett Williams got surgery on his wrist. Williams, of course, for those of you who aren't aware, is the Mets' top prospect in the entire system. Had a great breakout season last year. A lot of hype going into this season where he set a goal to be in the big leagues by the end of the year. That's not going to happen now. Hopefully, he can just get back on the diamond this year. The surgery is called a TFCC debridgement procedure. Don't exactly know what that details, but Williams started experiencing wrist discomfort in April. He got a cortisone shot. It didn't help. He got another cortisone shot. Still, there was discomfort that just was not going away. So that forced the Mets and Williams to decide he needed to get the procedure done. And the return time for this type of procedure, according to all the Mets beat writers and what they've been told, it's 8 to 10 weeks. So that would take him out for June and July for sure, and probably for a good chunk of August. He might get a 6-week season. Honestly, that might be the best case scenario. A couple weeks in August and most of September. It's going to be a rough year for Jett Williams to really not get the playing time that he wanted and to see his development sort of put on hold. I still think he can have a great offseason, be completely healthy going into next year, and if not break camp with the club, be up in short order after playing in AAA or whatever it is to start 2025. I still believe that we're going to see a lot of Jett next season, but this definitely does put a pause on his development. And it's really unfortunate, but I'm glad he got the procedure to clean it up, and hopefully he can rehab quickly and still get something out of this year on the field. Lastly, I was reading Anthony DiComo's story about Jett Williams, and I was pleased to find a little tidbit there on Drew Gilbert, the Mets' other top prospect, ranked by a lot of outlets as the second best prospect in the Mets system. Now, as we talked about on yesterday's show, according to us at justbaseball.com, maybe the fourth best prospect in this system, if you consider Christian Scott, the new top prospect in this system, Jett Williams at 2, Sproat at 3. Regardless, he is the best outfield prospect the Mets have, a guy that we thought could be up this year, and we cannot rule it out just yet, although because his season's not going to start until the end of June, if not early July, he's probably just going to spend the whole year in Syracuse, but at least there is a return date in mind. According to Anthony DiComo, the right hamstring strain currently has him set for a late June return. So that means he's getting close. Obviously, it was a really severe hamstring strain to be out as long as he has. But if he can get back on the field and have a healthy July, he can show the Mets a lot during that time. Probably July and August. I'd imagine best case, he's probably a September call-up, but still good to know that he actually is closer to coming back onto the field. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I think I decided I'm probably going to do a stream here. So make sure you keep your eyes on the YouTube feed to be part of that after the game today, this afternoon, to recap game 1 of the London series. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Again, subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. That's streaming 24/7, covering everything in the world of sports.